Hello, everyone. Ben DeBono here. Stuart, over on our first Moby Dick episode, in the comments, asked a really great question. I know we promised to answer questions in the episode, which we haven't done a great job of so far in this series. Hopefully, it'll go a little shorter next time and we can get to a couple questions. And hopefully, we remember feedback's not our strong point. But Stuart's is so good and so relevant, not only to Moby Dick and the discussion we're going to have, but to a lot of what we've talked about on the show, that I actually wanted to make its own little standalone video, not just for the purpose of Moby Dick, but because this is a topic that I reference a lot on the show, and I think it would be useful to at least have a quick 5-minute resource we can point people to. So Stuart's question was, what is liminality? What is liminal space? So if you're listening to the Moby Dick episodes, or even if you're not, and you've listened to the show for a while, you know this is a concept that we talk about, and especially in this first, both the introduction to Moby Dick and the first episode covering chapters 1 through 6, it's a really important point. And as I'm reading ahead and preparing content for both this week and the coming weeks of readings, I can say we're going to double down, triple down on discussions of liminality. It's just absolutely huge in Melville's work. So it's important that we get an idea, or at least have a base level understanding of what this is all about. I'm going to give you a really quick overview of it here. This is not exhaustive. I think this would be a good topic for a standalone episode with Matt and I on the main feed, but wanted to just do a quick hit of what liminality means. So liminality is a psychological concept. You'll find it showing up a lot in the work of Carl Jung. You'll find it in archetypal psychology, which, although I would not consider myself an expert in either of those topics, I would say I have more than a glancing interest in archetypal way of thinking, and have been fascinated with this concept of liminality for a long time. So the word itself actually comes from Latin. It comes from the Latin word limen, which means threshold. We'll talk more about the importance of thresholds in just a minute. So what is liminal space? What's that all about? Well, the first thing, if we were to break it down into just one key idea, it would be liminal space is the area between two fixed states. Okay, so to use the most literal example possible, if you can think of, like, we've probably all seen pottery being made, or, you know, maybe you've even made some yourself, but when it's spinning around on, I don't even know what it's called, I think it's a lathe. No, maybe not, that's a woodworking term. But it's spinning around on the little table that they have, and it's gooey, and it's it's moldable, and it's soft and everything. It's obviously different than the blob of clay that it starts with before it really softens up and becomes moldable, but it's not yet the hardened pot or dish or whatever it's going to become. It's in a liminal space between two fixed states. So when we talk about liminality, it's really that concept, and we're going to apply that to psychology. It can be applied in a more literal sense. In one sense, as humans, we're constantly going through liminality. We're constantly in motion. You get in your car to drive to work. You're in a state of liminality there between two places. So you can apply this very, very broadly, and you can understand examples of it all over the place in your day-to-day life. But we're going to focus mainly on it psychologically. A few words that I would use to describe liminality. I would say that it involves disruption. We're going to talk about neutrality in just a minute. But disruption, it doesn't necessarily mean bad, but it just means upheaval. There's fluidity. Things are in motion. They're not set. The change is going on. And the third word I would use is possible. Liminality is all about potential. It's potential that is not actualized yet. So liminality is the space, if we're to use this in a psychological sense, where change and transformation are possible. When you are not in liminal space, you are not changeable. You think about your opinions, that maybe you've had an opinion that was very, very rigid and hard set in your life, and over time that changed. Well, why did that happen? Why did it go from being gospel truth to something that you either adjusted or maybe wholesale disrupted? My own experience of converting from evangelicalism to Catholicism would be one such experience, where Catholicism not even being an option, not even remotely on the table, to being something I was doing. Well, that's an example of liminality. In my journey to the Catholic Church, I underwent liminal space in a psychological sense and got myself went through the liminal process. My opinions were disrupted, my beliefs were disrupted, and transformation became possible. So, characteristics of liminality. Well, there's a flattening, though not necessarily an erasure of hierarchy. Really good example of this from this last year for me. I've mentioned I work at a bank, and we were doing a lot of loans with this payroll protection program that came out early on in the pandemic. And it caused a lot of disruption in the bank in a good way, because we had to build a lot of technology and new processes and disrupt, old ways of doing things because our volume was way, way beyond what it normally is in terms of loans. And we're not Wells Fargo or U.S. Bank where we're automatically built to scale and you just slot something new in. And so what the bank went through, what a lot of us went through, was this flattening of hierarchy where you had executives down in the trenches, working exceptions, and titles stopped mattering and all of that. Now, in an example like that, this is a good case of that it's flattening but not erasure. Obviously, there's still decision makers, there's still authority, there's still people in an organization of the final call and something like that, but there's a flattening, okay? It's different than what it would be in normal times. There's a removal of social barriers. So take this as an example. Say that you are in the car with somebody who you vehemently disagree with politically, okay? So somehow you wound up on a trip with somebody, one of you is an ardent Trump supporter, and one of you is an ardent Biden supporter, and you just absolutely despise each other's opinions. Then imagine the car breaks down on the side of the road and you're stranded, and you have to work together to problem solve to get out of that and get working again. Well, at the end of that, you might still hate each other. You might still not agree on anything, but there's a bond that's been formed between you two. Why? Because in that place where the car broke down and you had to work together, you're in liminal space. These barriers, these categories that might matter in day-to-day life, I'm a Republican, you're a Democrat, all of that type of thing, they stop existing in liminal space. You kind of have that band of brothers experience of disruption, of tearing down. There's a deconstruction of previously accepted norms or truths or ideals. Liminal space is, by definition, reorienting. You might experience this with changing a job, and your job is really focused on this one task or this one goal for the company, and you go and work somewhere else, and now you have a different set of goals or a different way of doing things. And you've seen people who can do that really, really well, and people who struggle with it when they go through that whole disruptive experience. Liminality involves testing and growth. I think of obviously one of the classic examples of liminal space and story form, and one I've referenced on the show is Star Wars. And you think of like the training of Yoda to Luke on Dagobah, all of that. That's liminal space. It's this testing, it's growth. It's like Yoda's having him do all this arbitrary crap, and why does that matter? Why does it matter if he can lift rocks? That's completely impractical to what he's going to be doing later. But it's not the lifting of rocks. It's the ability to go through something and prove yourself. And maybe that something is arbitrary, but it's that testing and growth become part of liminal space. And then there's this threshold experience. A lot of times, especially in a narrative format, we'll see with liminal space an actual physical threshold that you have to cross on your way into or out of it. The best example of this in a narrative format, Neo taking the red pill in the Matrix. So that's as thresholdy as you can get, right? He swallows his pill, and instantly he's literally in a different world. Literally every norm, ideal, social hierarchy, all of that is completely changed for him. It's a very key moment. We're going to see a lot of threshold experiences in Moby Dick. Okay, a few important points on liminality before I wrap up here. Number one is that its goal is not permanence. This is a really important point for applying this to your own life, because people, we all want to change, we all want to grow and all of that, but your goal isn't to be in a constant state of flux. G.K. Chesterton has a great quote where he says the goal of opening one's mouth is to close it, goal of opening one's mind is like opening one's mouth to close it on something solid. It's like opening your mind up to new ideas is a good thing, but just staying there permanently might not be. All right, it's like your goal. If your goal is to change and to grow, you have to be growing towards something. Liminality doesn't seek to be permanent, and it can actually be a very destructive thing when it becomes permanent, either by choice or by circumstance in somebody's life. Number two, liminalities can be part of a larger cycle. There's this idea of embedded liminality going on, and a good example of this in the first Star Wars movie is Luke is going through this whole hero's journey thing, his threshold experience. He leaves Tatooine, and then while he's on the Falcon going to the Death Star, which is going to be another threshold for him, there's this little training scene with him and the droid that's shocking him or whatever it's doing. And it's like, okay, that in itself is a liminal experience. As part of that, he realizes he can sense the Force, and it's not perfect, but he gets better. He reaches a threshold of, oh, I did feel the Force there. It's like, okay, there's this tiny little liminal experience in this larger one that's happening in the greater film. Finally, I would say neutrality. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but liminal space is neither good nor bad. It just is. So disruption moves you into liminal space. That can be a welcome thing. It can be something you seek out. It can be deeply tragic. Job loss, death of a loved one, all of that. Those will push you into liminal space, and they're tragic. Something like choosing to get married, having a child, joyful things in our lives. Those are good things. We seek them out. We want them, but they also disrupt us and push us into that liminal space. The change that we go through, the only guarantee with liminal space is that you're going to be changed. There's no guarantee it's for the better or the worse. To go back to my example, if you're in the car with your political opponent, maybe when you break down on the side of the road, you just wind up fighting over solutions. You don't work together, and it becomes even, really entrenches you two more in your opposition to each other. The guarantee is change, but not change for the better, not change for the worse, just change. And that kind of goes to the last point. No guarantees in liminality. It is what it is. It is its own thing. Part of the nature of it is that you go in arms open to whatever it might be. And we really see that in Moby Dick, I think, with Ishmael in that first chapter. Let me just give a couple thoughts there. Again, this video is not meant to be specifically for Moby Dick, but since we're reading it, let me just close out with a couple thoughts around that to show you, maybe apply it to exactly what we're reading for those of you who are reading along with us. So chapter 1, when Ishmael's talking about going to sea as his alternative for a bullet to the head, basically it's describing his depression, we see him seeking out liminal space. That's really what's going on at the beginning of the novel, is Ishmael realizing he needs to be disrupted. He needs to intentionally find this disruption in order to survive. Number 2 is that we've already seen Melville's emphasis on the primordial in these early chapters. I'm thinking especially of the oil painting in the Spouter Inn that we talked a lot about from chapter 3, where it's kind of this clash of good versus evil, but on a very base level, and it's really ambiguous what's going on there, and then eventually resolves itself into a picture of a whale. This primordialness, if you will, or primordiality is probably the more accurate way to put it, is really a result of extreme liminality. You think about it, let's say you buy a house and there's wallpaper and, there's tons of layers of paint and all of that, but you want to get down to the base level as you're stripping stuff away. You're stripping it away. That's what liminality does. In the case of Moby Dick, we're going to see it strip our characters away until we're at that primordial space, which for Melville is symbolized by the sea. And finally, and we're going to see this especially in the next episode, Matt and I are recording in a couple of days, the relationship that develops between Ishmael and Queequeg is founded on social liminality, that breaking down of hierarchy and barriers. The two could not be more different in both nationality, ethnicity, religion, temperament, all of this stuff. Couldn't be more different. But by entering into liminal space together, all of that would matter in the normal world doesn't matter in the course of the novel. They are in liminal space and are able to form a friendship because of that. All right, I hope that was helpful. Went a little longer than I was hoping it would, but that's how it goes with interesting topics like this. I do want to eventually, I think, do a full episode on this. There's a lot we could cover beyond this. But wanted to get it out there right away in case there's other people who were wondering, like, Stuart, kind of what exactly does this mean? I know you guys have talked about it, but what does it really mean? There's your brief intro to liminal space. I hope it was helpful. And for those of you who are reading along with Moby Dick, glad to have you aboard. And I think it's going to be a really great experience. We'll talk to you later.